The city lights reflected off his polished shoes as Marcus Avery stepped out of the sleek black sedan, adjusting his navy blue suit with precision born from years in power corridors. He had 30 minutes before the televised policy briefing, a brief window to grab a coffee, inhale the normalcy of an ordinary morning. A siren cut through the hum of traffic. The red and blue glare of a patrol car splashed across the sidewalk. Marcus froze. The officer's face was rigid, jaw tight, eyes scanning him like a dossier. "Step out of the car." The officer barked, voice slicing through the early morning calm. Marcus blinked, mind racing. He had done nothing wrong. His suit, his tie, the carefully chosen cufflinks, it screamed authority, professionalism. But here, on this street, none of it mattered. Sir, I'm on my way to a briefing. I have an ID." The officer waved a dismissive hand. "ID? I don't care. Move." Passers-by shifted uneasily, murmurs rising. A young woman whispered under her breath, "Why him?" Marcus felt a cold heat creep along his spine. His pulse thudded against the ribcage he had been trained to armor. Inside, panic clawed at reason. He was visible, judged, suspended in a moment that reduced decades of experience to suspicion and fear. "Don't make me tell you again," the officer snapped, stepping closer. Marcus' hands hovered over the briefcase at his feet. One wrong gesture, one misread motion, and this morning, everything could spiral into something unrecognizable. A hard hand gripped his shoulder. Marcus froze. And then, in that suffocating silence, he realized the officer had no idea who he truly was. The city held its breath. The patrol car's engine growled like a predator in the quiet morning. Marcus Avery adjusted his tie again, a ritual to remind himself that professionalism could shield him from the world's scrutiny. He had 25 minutes before the televised briefing, a half-hour window to grab a coffee and breathe like a normal man in a normal city. The officer's footsteps echoed on the pavement. "Step out of the car," Reynolds commanded, voice brittle with assumed authority. Marcus froze. He felt a sudden weight of suspicion pressing against his chest. "Sir, I'm on my way to a briefing," Marcus said, reaching for his ID. "I have credentials." Reynolds waved him off. "I don't care. Step out." Marcus hesitated. Every fiber of his being screamed the absurdity of it. A black man in a tailored suit, polished shoes, a briefcase of policy documents, considered a threat because of skin. A passerby, a young man in a delivery uniform, muttered under his breath, "Why him?" Marcus' pulse quickened. He inhaled slowly, trying to anchor himself in rationality. "Officer, I assure you, I'm not." "Don't make me tell you again," Reynolds snapped, stepping closer. The officer's hand grazed Marcus' shoulder, firm, invasive. The weight of every prior microaggression, every glance of suspicion, every silent dismissal crashed over him. Marcus stopped, realizing that words carried no power here. Authority was wielded not by logic, but by visibility and fear. Reynolds circled him, scrutinizing like a hawk. "License and registration," he demanded. Marcus opened his briefcase, fingers brushing over the leather, over documents that represented years of expertise. He drew out his credentials. "I am Marcus Avery, President's Advisory Team. I have a scheduled briefing." Reynolds glanced at the card and back to Marcus, expression unreadable. "ID doesn't change anything," he said, tone venomous. "You still fit the profile." The words hit Marcus like a hammer. Fit the profile. Not a man, not a professional, not a citizen, but a category someone else had assigned. By now, a small crowd had gathered, hesitant, silent, eyes dotted between the uniform and the man in the suit. A woman with a stroller muttered, "This is wrong." Reynolds ignored her, feeding on silence and submission. Marcus clenched his jaw, inhaling the cool morning air to steady a pulse that threatened to betray him. His hands hovered near the briefcase, a gesture of readiness, of restraint. "Step aside," Reynolds barked, and with that, one hand gripped Marcus' shoulder again, the other reaching for his belt. Marcus froze, every instinct screaming caution. A car honked somewhere down the street. The hum of the city continued, indifferent, and in that suspended heartbeat, Marcus realized Reynolds had no concept of who he truly was. The officer's grip tightened. The world narrowed to a glare, A gesture, a flash of red and blue lights. Marcus' stomach churned, mind racing through escape. Explanation, appeal, nothing sufficed. The air hung heavy, charged with unspoken accusation. Marcus could see the reflection of the city in his briefcase class, hundreds of lives passing by, none intervening, yet all witnesses to this moment. Reynolds leaned closer. Move, or I'll make you. Marcus' hands trembled, not from fear of authority, but from the knowledge that the city's machinery could reduce him to suspicion in seconds despite everything he had owned. He inhaled, exhaling slowly, locking eyes with the officer. The moment stretched, suspended between action and consequence, humiliation and assertion. He had no allies here, not yet. The officer's grip on his shoulder tightened further, deliberate, oppressive. Marcus' pulse echoed in his ears. One wrong move, one wrong gesture, one misplaced word, and the morning and everything could spiral into chaos. The crowd held its breath. Marcus did too. The officer said nothing more, but the silence carried a weight heavier than any accusation. And in that single, suffocating moment, Marcus knew that the encounter had only begun. Marcus walked briskly down the sidewalk after the encounter, but the rhythm of the city felt jagged, off-kilter. Every step echoed like a warning, every glance from strangers a subtle accusation. His mind replayed Reynolds' words, "You still fit the profile." A phrase so simple, yet so loaded, it reduced a lifetime of achievement to a single, arbitrary stereotype. He ducked into a corner cafe, the smell of roasted coffee beans momentarily grounding him. The barista, a young man with nervous eyes, avoided looking directly at him. Marcus ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, fingers drumming against the polished tabletop. He stared out at the street where the patrol car had disappeared, the red and blue glow gone but the tension lingering like a second skin. "Is everything okay?" a voice asked behind him. Marcus turned. A colleague, Elena Martinez, stood awkwardly with her coat open, hands clasped. "Just a run-in," he said lightly, though his chest still tightened. He knew the truth. This had been more than a run-in. Elena perched across from him. "You seem shaken. Are you sure you're okay?" Marcus met her gaze, steadying himself. "I'm fine. It's just, sometimes visibility is a curse. People see the suit, the badge of authority, and project their fears." Elena frowned. "You mean because of your race?" Marcus leaned back, eyes narrowing at the condensation on his coffee cup. "Because of my race. Because of decades of assumptions that come with it. That officer didn't see me as Marcus Avery, President's advisory team. He saw a black man in a suit. That's all." Her lips pressed together. She didn't need to say it. She understood. He remembered another morning, years ago, walking into the Department of Policy Analysis. White colleagues offered nods. Security guards eyed him with suspicion. A vendor had called the police on him once, mistaking him for someone else because his skin did not match the expected face of authority. Each incident stacked, invisible to the world but visible to him, a record of microaggressions and systemic bias. Marcus spoke more to the cafe than to her. "The paradox of this life is that I am powerful in offices, influential in policy, yet in the street I am assumed guilty until proven otherwise. And the proof, the credentials, the intelligence, the service, none of it matters." Elena leaned forward. "So what do you do? Report it." Marcus shook his head. "Immediate reporting risks escalation. I need leverage, witnesses, evidence. I need a record of behavior, patterns. Patience is a weapon here. But patience is exhausting. Every day, every encounter is a negotiation of presence, an audit of identity. How much of me must I prove just to exist safely?" He remembered the officer's grip on his shoulder, the way Reynolds' eyes had flicked past him, scanning the briefcase as if it were a threat rather than policy documents. A small crowd had watched and remained silent. People who feared intervention, people who assumed compliance, people who ignored. "Silence is complicity," Marcus murmured, more to himself than Elena. "Every observer is either witness or accomplice. And the city doesn't wait for me to assert myself. It assumes guilt first, humanity second." The cafe door opened, a bell tinkling. Marcus flinched at the sudden sound, a residual reflex from the patrol car's siren. He took a sip of coffee, bitter, grounding. Elena watched him, tentative. You carry so much. And yet, she paused, you survived this long. Marcus smiled faintly, a practice shield. Survival is different from peace. Survival is constant calculation. Peace is a luxury reserved for those whose existence isn't questioned every morning on the sidewalk. His mind wandered to the upcoming briefing. The president's team depended on him. Policy, strategy, influence, all mattered. And yet, here, in a city street, he had been reduced to fear, assumption, and prejudice. It was a jarring contrast. Marcus tapped his fingers against the cup. Every encounter reminds me that achievement doesn't immunize against bias. I can draft policy on social equity, advise on legislation, yet a uniformed officer can erase all authority with a hand on my shoulder and a single line, you still fit the profile. Elena's eyes softened. It's not fair, and it shouldn't happen. No, Marcus said quietly, it shouldn't. But fairness is often irrelevant to those who wield power without accountability. The challenge is ensuring systems recognize bias, enforce justice, and prevent recurrence. One incident can't undo the systemic patterns, but it can expose them if handled carefully. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through social media mentions of morning traffic altercation. The story had already begun to appear. Brief snippets, witness accounts, speculation. No mention of his position, his role, or the reality. Just a black man stopped by a police officer. Just a profile, fitted neatly into a preconceived narrative. Marcus exhaled, the weight pressing on him again. He had to decide, wait, document, gather witnesses, or confront the system immediately. Each choice carried risk, yet inaction guaranteed erasure. The barista placed a refill before him. Marcus nodded in thanks, returning to the reflection in the window. Outside, life moved, oblivious. Cars passed, pedestrians hurried, the city thrummed with indifference. And yet, every step forward would demand vigilance. Every word, every gesture, every document could be scrutinized, misinterpreted, weaponized. His existence in the public eye meant constant negotiation of identity, of perception, of assumed guilt. Elena stood. I'll check in later. Be careful. Marcus nodded, knowing careful was insufficient. Careful would never be enough when the machinery of bias was so entrenched. He drained his coffee, the bitterness lingering on his tongue, a mirror of reality. As he left the cafe, the morning sun struck his polished shoes, highlighting the meticulous details of a life earned through effort, intellect, and perseverance. Yet the shadow of suspicion followed him, a reminder. Status, achievement, and authority did not erase the color of his skin in the eyes of the city, nor in the grip of a hand that judged him before knowing him. The street stretched ahead, indifferent and charged. Marcus adjusted his chute, squared his shoulders, and stepped forward. Visibility was a burden, invisibility a threat, and every choice carried consequence. The city held its rhythm, unaware. Marcus carried its weight. Officer Reynolds sat in the patrol car, the dashboard lights casting a cold glow across his face. His hands drummed on the steering wheel, but the rhythm was jagged, uneasy. To him, the morning encounter was ordinary, a routine check amplified by instinct and experience. Yet beneath the badge, beneath the uniform, lay a tapestry of insecurities and assumptions, stitched by a lifetime of reinforced narratives. Did you see him? His partner, Officer Mallory, asked from the passenger seat, eyes half-lit with boredom and curiosity. Yeah, Reynolds muttered, leaning back, letting the seat absorb some of his tension. Suit, clean shoes, walked like he owned the block. But something about him didn't feel right. Mallory smirked. He looked fine to me. Just some guy in a suit. Reynolds' jaw tightened. That's the problem. People like him think authority protects them. But it doesn't always shield. Sometimes it draws attention. I know the signs. Mallory tilted his head, skeptical. The signs of what? Of someone who doesn't belong here, Reynolds said sharply, voice low, a mixture of fear and certainty. I've seen it before. Hands in the wrong place. Nervous smiles that don't match the eyes. Even when they look successful, sometimes the profile fits. And when the profile fits, you have to act. Mallory whistled softly, impressed and wary. You think you handled it okay? Reynolds exhaled through his nose. I think I followed procedure. But, he paused, eyes narrowing. Sometimes the system doesn't support us enough. Sometimes the public misreads. They forget the dangers, the risks. They forget how easily people exploit uniforms, exploit trust. He glanced at the ID card Marcus had presented. The words President's advisory team blurred in his mind, abstract and inconsequential. Authority didn't erase instinct. Background didn't alter profile. Reynolds had been trained to trust what he felt over what he saw, to act first, explain later. Mallory leaned closer. You think he'll report this? Reynolds shrugged. Maybe, but if he does, it won't matter. Procedure protects me. My record is clean. I have witnesses. I followed the rules. Reynolds thought back to his childhood, a patchwork of lessons and inherited fears. Growing up in neighborhoods where trust was scarce, he had learned to read people, to judge them quickly. His father, a retired officer, had drilled him with sayings, better safe than sorry. Always watch your surroundings. Never let them see fear in your eyes. Those lessons, once survival skills, had evolved into professional heuristics, biases masquerading as intuition. You were tense, though, Mallory added, breaking the quiet. His hands never did anything wrong. You jumped. Reynolds stiffened. Better to overreact than underreact. I've read the reports. People in authority positions can conceal threat, especially when the profile fits. It's ingrained. It's precaution. Mallory watched him carefully. Precaution or prejudice? The words hit Reynolds, but he masked it with a tight-lipped smile. Both, maybe. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. But it doesn't matter. Actions matter more than theory. He replayed the encounter in his mind. The man in the suit, the briefcase, the brief flicker of defiance, the crowd of witnesses. He had felt in control, commanding, enforcing rules. And yet, deep inside, a flicker of unease remained. The uniform had protected him, yes, but it had also forced him to confront his own assumptions. He hated it. Hated that his perception could be flawed. Hated that it might cause consequences he had not anticipated. Reynolds leaned back, gripping the wheel. If he reports me, the brass will back me. Procedure is on my side. Rules are clear. No one questions rules. Yet part of him knew that rules were only as objective as those enforcing them. The gray areas, the human judgment, the biases, they all lurk between the lines. Mallory glanced out the windshield. You think people see us as enforcers or oppressors? Reynolds didn't answer immediately. He thought of Marcus, dignified, composed, yet judged instantly. He thought of the crowd, the silent witnesses, the whispered, "Why him?" And he realized people would see them both. He would be authority. He would be the visible enforcer. And Marcus, he would be reduced, interpreted, misunderstood. Reynolds exhaled again, leaning closer to the dashboard. I do my job, he said finally. I enforce rules. But perception is tricky. People judge us. They assume intentions. They forget the responsibility we carry. Mallory's silence was a small acknowledgement. No further words were necessary. The patrol car hummed. The lights dim, the morning continuing without pause. Outside, the city moved, indifferent, unaware of the private calculus within the car. Reynolds' mind returned to the ID card, the credentials he had glanced at, and the fleeting sense of unease. I don't know this man. I don't understand him. And maybe that's why I acted. His reflection stared back at him from the dashboard glass, uniform crisp, face hardened, eyes conflicted. The car radio buzzed with routine traffic updates, but Reynolds barely noticed. He was replaying the encounter, measuring it against a lifetime of conditioning, protocol, and internalized fear. The city didn't wait for understanding. It expected action, and he had acted. Do you ever wonder, Mallory said quietly, if we stop the wrong person sometimes? Reynolds didn't answer immediately. The thought was dangerous, fragile. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes it's complicated. Sometimes I just follow instinct. He turned the key in the ignition, ready to move on, to resume routine. But the encounter lingered, a shadow that followed him like the city's long, indifferent gaze. Marcus Avery, a name, a presence, an authority, was someone he had misread, and that misreading planted a seed of tension he couldn't shake. Reynolds adjusted his uniform, tightened his grip on the wheel. Rules protected him, procedure justified him, but the lingering doubt, however faint, was a reminder. Perception was never perfect, and power carried weight beyond badges and IDs. The patrol car rolled into traffic, lights fading, leaving the morning sidewalk empty but charged. Marcus had moved on, but the officer remained haunted by a question he couldn't voice aloud. Had he enforced safety, or had he enforced prejudice? The city continued. The unseen witnesses carried fragments of the moment in their minds. And somewhere, in the quiet calculus of judgment and authority, Reynolds would be forced to confront the consequences, both professional and moral, of his assumptions. By late morning, Marcus Avery's encounter with Officer Reynolds had begun circulating on social media. A hastily taken cell phone video, shaky and grainy, showed a man in a navy blue suit being stalked by a uniformed officer, hands gesturing defensively, briefcase in tow. The clip looped endlessly, accumulating likes, shares, and speculative comments. Marcus sat in his office, the glass walls of the advisory suite reflecting the city skyline, but all he could see was a frame of that video and the echo of Reynolds' voice. His phone buzzed incessantly, messages from colleagues, news alerts, and friend requests from strangers curious about the incident. He ignored them for the moment, focusing instead on the immediate task, controlling the narrative before it spiraled. Elena Martinez leaned against his desk, eyes scanning the screen. They are calling it a traffic altercation. No one knows who you are. Marcus rubbed his temples. Of course they don't. Identity doesn't matter in a viral clip. Only the immediate perception matters. A black man in a suit looks suspicious until context is provided. Elena's expression hardened. It's infuriating. People will assume the worst. That's the point, Marcus said, voice low but steady. Assumptions drive perception, and perception drives consequences. One misinterpretation can dictate public opinion, affect policy credibility, even influence legal outcomes. This isn't just embarrassment, it's systemic vulnerability. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. I have to manage witnesses, statements, and social channels. Every post, every comment, every snippet matters. If Reynolds tries to justify his actions, the public narrative must be ready. Strategy is as important as truth. A reporter's call came in, breaking the silence. Mr. Avery, can you comment on the incident this morning? Marcus's fingers hovered over the phone. Carefully measured words were necessary. I am aware of the video circulating. I am cooperating with the relevant authorities. Further statements will be made through official channels. The reporter pressed, but do you feel targeted? Marcus's jaw tightened. He chose a neutral phrasing. Every citizen deserves equitable treatment under law. I trust the review process will ensure accountability. The line went dead. Elena exhaled. You're too measured. People want outrage, passion, a story that bites. Marcus shook his head. Outrage isn't protection. Evidence is protection. And strategy beats emotion when systems are involved. If I lose control of narrative, the system could turn against me. He remembered the crowd on the street, the silent witnesses who had watched, who had whispered, "Why him?" Their silence had been a complicity that mirrored the wider social media audience now scrutinizing him. Hundreds, thousands, scrolling past a man's dignity like it was optional. A colleague from the communications office entered. We compiled preliminary statements from witnesses. They corroborate your account. Marcus nodded. Good. Prepare a timeline, cross-reference timestamps, and collect any security footage nearby. Reynolds' actions must be contextualized. The system must see patterns, not isolated incidents. Hours passed in a blur of calls, messages, and briefings. Marcus's team monitored public sentiment, identifying posts that skewed interpretation and drafting clarifications. Each conversation was heavy with the weight of potential misreading, every word meticulously calculated. Meanwhile, snippets of online discourse revealed the subtle ways bias operated. Comments alternated between sympathy and doubt, admiration and skepticism. probably speeding or showing attitude. Looks like a regular stop. Why make it a racial issue? Marcus read them, noting the language, the assumptions embedded in casual phrasing. Patterns emerged, assumptions based on dress, skin, and perceived demeanor. The social fabric reflected the same systemic bias he had faced on the sidewalk. By afternoon, mainstream media picked up the story. Headlines varied. Businessman stopped by police in traffic incident. Viral video sparks debate over policing and bias. Suit-wearing man stopped, justified or prejudice. Marcus reviewed them, silently analyzing each narrative spin. Some implied wrongdoing on his part. Others highlighted systemic concern. Elena watched, exasperated. It's turning into a circus. Marcus exhaled. Perception is a battlefield. Every headline, every tweet is a front line. I have to remain tactical. If I overreact publicly, I lose credibility. If I underreact, Reynolds sets a narrative. Control is survival. He recalled the officer's dismissive glare, the crowd silence, the hum of traffic and sirens, every element contributing to a tableau of power imbalance. Now, that tableau had expanded beyond the street to digital screens, news feeds, and living rooms across the city. The personal had become public, and public scrutiny carried tangible consequences. A notification pinged, a journalist requesting an exclusive interview. Marcus leaned back, fingers steepled. We'll schedule, but only through official channels. I will control context, frame the story, and ensure evidence supports narrative. No improvisation. No misrepresentation. Elena shook her head. You're always 3 steps ahead. But does it ever feel like you're fighting alone? Marcus allowed a brief pause, letting the tension settle. Alone isn't the issue. Recognition is. Society hasn't conditioned itself to see all of me at once. Only fragments are visible. Only fragments are judged. The challenge is assembling those fragments into a coherent whole before assumptions take root. The afternoon stretched into early evening. Marcus continued coordinating witness statements, social media responses, and internal briefings. Each interaction was heavy with responsibility. One misstep, one overlooked comment, one delayed clarification could tilt public perception. The invisible labor of authority, amplified by systemic bias, demanded constant vigilance. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars honked, pedestrians passed, a street musician played a jazz riff near the cafe. The life of the city was indifferent to individual struggle. Yet within the digital realm, Marcus' presence was magnified, scrutinized, dissected. He paused to read a comment. Why is he dressed like that if it's just walking? The implicit judgment weighed on him. Dress as suspicion, presence as provocation. The small details, polished shoes, briefcase, tailored suit, became markers for bias, assumptions weaponized against him. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. You're handling this well, more than most could. Marcus looked at her, expression taut. Handling is not winning. The system is unforgiving. And even if Reynolds is disciplined, the public perception remains fractured. The emotional cost isn't zero. The pattern isn't isolated. This is one node in a network of systemic inequity. He exhaled slowly, staring at the skyline, the city beyond the glass walls, indifferent and immense. Public scrutiny had begun, the digital and physical witnesses now intertwined. One misstep, one narrative gap, and the consequences could extend far beyond the morning sidewalk. Marcus rose, smoothing his suit. Prepare the official statements for tonight. Ensure social media monitoring continues. Gather all timestamps, witnesses, and video feeds. Reynolds' profile, his pattern of enforcement, must be exposed in context. Evidence is the only defense against misperception. Marcus Avery arrived at the precinct mid-morning, briefcase in hand, his suit crisp but tension evident in the tight set of his jaw. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, a sterile contrast to the charged energy he carried. He requested to speak with Officer Reynolds' superior, intending to confront the incident formally. Lieutenant Harris, a tall man with thinning hair and a perpetually neutral expression, motioned him to a small conference room. The walls were beige, unadorned, fluorescent lights humming overhead, accentuating the sense of institutional control. Marcus set down his briefcase. I want to file a formal complaint regarding Officer Reynolds, he said, voice steady but firm. This morning, I was stopped, harassed, and treated as a suspect without cause. Harris raised an eyebrow. Harassed? What do you mean exactly? Marcus pulled out the ID, laying it flat on the table. I'm a member of the President's advisory team. I presented credentials, explained my purpose, and complied fully with his requests. Yet he ignored all of it, relying on arbitrary assumptions about my appearance and race. The officer's conduct was aggressive, dismissive, and discriminatory. Harris leaned back, fingers steepled. You're saying he acted on bias. That's a serious allegation. Do you have witnesses? Marcus nodded. Several bystanders. The incident was captured on video. Social media has already circulated fragments. I want this documented fully and investigated. Harris' expression remained neutral, but his eyes flicked toward the ID. Marcus noted the subtle shift, the tension between protocol and recognition. You understand the officer may claim procedure justifies his actions. Harris asked. Marcus leaned forward, intensity in his gaze. Procedure does not permit racial profiling. It does not permit the misuse of authority to humiliate or intimidate a citizen. I am here to ensure the system recognizes bias when it cares and that accountability is enforced. Harris nodded slowly. Very well. We'll record your statement. Officer Reynolds will be required to provide his account. The Internal Affairs Unit will review the footage, timestamps, and witness statements. Marcus exhaled, fighting the urge to let relief wash over him. Filing the complaint was only the first step. The real challenge was ensuring action, exposing systemic patterns, and protecting his own reputation from misrepresentation. The lieutenant paused. You understand this process can be slow. Officers are often protected under procedural guidelines. Even with evidence, there's no guarantee of immediate consequence. Marcus' pulse tightened. I understand, but inaction guarantees perpetuation of bias. Accountability requires visibility, and visibility requires insistence. As the meeting ended, Marcus stepped out into the corridor, phone buzzing incessantly. Notifications, messages, emails, all a reminder that public perception and bureaucratic procedure existed in parallel, each influencing outcomes. Later that afternoon, Marcus met with his legal counsel, Jasmine Kaur, in a quiet office near City Hall. She had been briefed on the morning incident and was prepared to strategize a formal response. The challenge, Jasmine said, is that Reynolds will claim adherence to protocol. You'll need witnesses, statements, social media evidence, video footage, and a clear timeline. Your identity, your position, and the officer's misjudgment all need to be documented rigorously. Marcus nodded. I've already begun compiling evidence. But this is bigger than me. It's a systemic problem. One officer, one video, one complaint. It's symptomatic of broader biases in enforcement and public perception. Jasmine studied him. You're aware the emotional toll will be significant. Public scrutiny, potential backlash, legal proceedings. It's a lot to carry. I know, Marcus admitted. And it's not just personal. It's societal. Every interaction, every assumption reinforces a pattern. If the system tolerates misconduct, it signals that bias is permissible. That's why I cannot step aside. Marcus returned to the site of the incident, a small plaza flanked by glass-fronted offices, and walked the stretch where Reynolds had stopped him. He observed the passers-by, the vendors, the subtle ways life moved forward, indifferent. The same street, the same routine, yet the memory of humiliation made the concrete feel different, charged. A young man approached hesitantly. Excuse me, were you the man in the video this morning? Marcus nodded. Yes. The man's expression was cautious. I saw what happened. That officer, he was rough. It wasn't right. Marcus offered a small nod of acknowledgement. Your testimony will be part of the record. Every witness matters. Every observation matters. The man hesitated. I'll help however I can. It was a minor act of resistance, a small affirmation against a system that normalized silence. Yet to Marcus, it mattered. Each acknowledgement, each witness, shifted the scale from assumption toward accountability. Later, Back in his office, Marcus reviewed surveillance footage from nearby businesses. He watched Reynolds approach, the officer's rigid posture, the dismissive hand gestures, and the tightening of his jaw as he gripped Marcus' shoulder. Each movement was analyzed, annotated, and cross-referenced with witness statements. He called Elena, prepare an internal briefing for the president's office. This is not just about personal grievance. It's a systemic concern. Officer conduct, witness accounts, social media presence, all must be framed in context. Pattern recognition is key. Elena listened. Understood, but you're asking a lot. You've already handled so much today. I'm asking what's necessary, Marcus said. Responsibility isn't optional. Influence carries a duty. Authority is only meaningful if it is wielded ethically. The stakes aren't just personal, they're societal. As the evening fell, Marcus stood by the window, watching traffic flow in the dimming light. The city moved on, unaware of the battle being waged in corridors of power, in internal affairs units, in social feeds, and in legal offices. Yet the microcosm of the morning incident had reverberations far beyond a single street. He thought of Reynolds, unaware of the scope of the scrutiny he had triggered. Authority unchecked, assumptions unchecked, bias unchecked. It was a volatile combination. Marcus' role now was to ensure the system recognized and corrected itself, not only for him but for everyone reduced to a profile by color, clothing, or presence. He inhaled deeply, fingers tightening around the briefcase strap. Identity, he realized, was a battlefield. Every assertion, every declaration, every piece of evidence was a weapon against erasure. Visibility was not a gift, it was a responsibility. As he prepared documents for submission, Marcus felt the weight of anticipation, of vigilance, and of strategy. Reynolds' assumptions, once physical, now extended into procedural and public arenas. The confrontation had escalated from the street to the system itself. And Marcus Avery, despite exhaustion and tension, knew he could not yield. Every move mattered. Every statement mattered. Every witness mattered. The city outside glimmered with ordinary life. Inside, the machinery of accountability had begun to turn. Marcus Avery sat in the conference room of the President's Advisory Office, the polished oak table reflecting the fluorescent ceiling lights. Around him, his team of legal, communications, and policy experts reviewed the compiled evidence from the morning's incident. The atmosphere was tense but purposeful. This was a point where planning met execution, where observation became leverage. Footage from nearby security cameras corroborates your timeline, Jasmine Kaur said, tapping the screen. Reynolds' approach, the way he circled you, the repeated commands, it all aligns with witness statements. The social media video is circulating globally, and we've documented initial public reactions. Marcus nodded, absorbing the layers of accountability. Good. Ensure that every frame is time-stamped, every witness identified, and every comment logged. I want a complete dossier before the Internal Affairs review. Elena Martinez added, we've also mapped Reynolds' prior complaints. 3 minor incidents over the last 5 years, none resulting in disciplinary action. Pattern recognition is key. This isn't isolated. Marcus exhaled slowly, a mixture of resolve and fatigue. Patterns are invisible until someone highlights them. Our task is to make the system see, to confront institutional inertia with concrete evidence. He leaned forward, voice low but commanding. Every document, every screenshot, every testimony is a thread. Our job is to weave them into a tapestry that exposes misconduct without ambiguity. Reynolds cannot claim misinterpretation or procedural defense if the evidence is overwhelming. A colleague from communications spoke next. We prepared a statement for release contingent on official review. It emphasizes systemic accountability rather than personal grievance. We maintain professional tone while highlighting misconduct. Marcus nodded approvingly. Excellent. Tone matters. Rage is visible. Professionalism ensures credibility. The public must understand not only the act but the pattern of bias it represents. One officer's assumptions are indicative of a larger issue. He recalled the moments on the sidewalk, the firm grip on his shoulder, the dismissive hand gestures, the glare that reduced him from professional authority to a suspect in a stereotype. That memory now fueled strategy rather than panic. Emotional response had been transformed into meticulous preparation. By mid-afternoon, Marcus contacted journalists with precise instructions. All inquiries go through the official channel, he emphasized. Focus on factual reporting. Avoid speculation. Highlight verified evidence. Context is critical. Meanwhile, Jasmine coordinated legal submissions. We're preparing the internal affairs report for the department. Every witness statement, every video frame, and every social media post is cross-referenced. Reynolds' prior history strengthens our position. Marcus reviewed Reynolds' prior complaints carefully, a pattern of stops involving young black men, each dismissed as routine. Evidence suggested an unconscious, or perhaps conscious, bias enforced by institutional leniency. The dossiers painted a clear picture, a system permitting microaggressions and outright profiling to persist. He looked at the city outside the office window. Streets were busy, traffic flowing without pause, unaware of the strategic operations unfolding within offices and conference rooms. Yet the stakes were enormous. Accountability here would not only punish misconduct, but signal that systemic bias could not operate unchecked. Elena interrupted his thoughts. The Internal Affairs Liaison has requested a preliminary meeting. They want to ensure all materials are organized and evidence is complete. Reynolds' defense will be procedural, anticipated. Marcus leaned back in his chair. We anticipate everything. Our defense is the evidence itself. Actions, words, patterns, not rhetoric, not conjecture, not anger. Precision ensures impact. Anything less risks dilution. They reviewed each segment of video again. Reynolds' glare, the tightening of his jaw, the hand on Marcus' shoulder, all became data points. Each witness interview contributed context, emotional response, and corroboration. Marcus annotated notes, marking behavior indicative of bias. The procedural violations, though subtle, were undeniable when viewed collectively. By evening, Marcus coordinated with a senior official in the Department of Internal Affairs. The message was clear. Systemic bias, once documented, required action. Reynolds' authority, previously unquestioned, was now scrutinized. The machinery of institutional accountability had begun to engage. Marcus knew this was only part of the battle. Public opinion, social media narratives, and institutional inertia all presented additional challenges. He had to anticipate misinterpretation, manage leaks, and ensure the narrative remained anchored in fact. A notification pinged, another video from a passerby. This one captured the officer's aggressive posture from a different angle. Marcus immediately instructed his team to catalog it, add it to the dossier, and verify timestamps. Each addition reinforced the pattern. Reynolds' actions were not an isolated misjudgment, but a predictable manifestation of systemic bias. He paused, reflecting on the officer's worldview, the ingrained assumptions, the reliance on gut perception over documented identity, the institutional reinforcement of his authority. Reynolds had operated within a framework that normalized suspicion, while consequences were deferred or diluted. The moral costs had been invisible to the officer, but now accountability would illuminate it fully. Marcus prepared a briefing for the president's office, ensuring the narrative was precise, professional, and anchored in evidence. He outlined the incident, Reynolds' prior pattern, witness statements, and public attention. He highlighted both procedural violations and the broader implications for policy, training, and oversight. Elena observed him meticulously. You're doing more than defending yourself. You're challenging a system. Marcus' jaw tightened. Every documented incident, every exposed bias, serves as a warning. The system must learn. Reynolds is not just an individual problem. He represents institutional blind spots. Accountability here's precedent. By nightfall, the Internal Affairs team had begun reviewing compiled materials. Marcus watched emails flow in from colleagues confirming documentation, witness verification, and evidence consistency. The process, slow yet methodical, was a mechanism of exposure. Finally, Marcus closed his briefcase, exhausted but resolute. The officer who had reduced him to suspicion and fear would now face scrutiny under the same systems he assumed shielded him. Authority, when unchecked, was dangerous, but when exposed, it could be corrected. Marcus exhaled, feeling the tension shift slightly. Power was being unmasked, and the city, the system, and the public were witnesses. The struggle was far from over, but the first major victory, truth and documentation over assumption and bias, was underway. He looked out the office window, city lights glimmering like distant stars. One man's assumptions had threatened his dignity. One system's inertia had enabled it. Now, both would confront accountability. The process was slow, meticulous, and demanding, but it was inevitable. Marcus adjusted his tie, shoulders squared, visibility carried. The next morning, Marcus Avery arrived at the Internal Affairs office, briefcase in hand, a quiet tension coiled beneath his composed exterior. The building smelled of paper, coffee, and antiseptic, a sterile reminder of bureaucracy and procedure. He passed through the security checkpoint with ease, though the weight of anticipation pressed against his chest. Inside, Lieutenant Harris greeted him with a formal nod. "Mr. Avery, thank you for arriving on time. The team is prepared to review all materials." Marcus set his briefcase on the conference table. Everything is organized. Video, witness statements, timestamps, social media posts, prior complaints, all cross-referenced and verified. A young investigator, clipboard in hand, spoke up. "We'll proceed systematically. Officer Reynolds' conduct, your account, and all corroborating evidence will be reviewed together. Our goal is clarity, not conjecture." Marcus nodded, eyes scanning the room. The investigators, uniformed officers and civilians alike, were impartial instruments of the system he now relied on. Yet he knew that impartiality was fragile. Bias could still seep into judgments. Assumptions could obscure truth. Vigilance was required. The session began with a review of video footage. Each clip displayed Reynolds' approach, the rigid posture, the brief pause before physical contact, the hand on Marcus' shoulder. Annotated notes highlighted aggressive gestures, dismissive commands, and failure to acknowledge identification. Witness statements were read aloud. A street vendor, a pedestrian, even a passerby who had filmed the encounter on their phone. All corroborated Marcus' account. Harris leaned forward, fingers steepled. This demonstrates a clear deviation from protocol. However, we need to consider intent. The officer may argue that procedural justification guided his actions. Marcus' expression remained composed. Intent is insufficient when conduct violates both policy and constitutional rights. Procedural adherence cannot shield misconduct rooted in bias. One of the investigators, a woman with keen eyes, asked, "Are you suggesting this is systemic behavior?" "Yes," Marcus replied. "This is not an isolated incident." Reynolds' prior minor complaints reflect a pattern of assumptions applied selectively, often toward individuals who do not conform to his internalized expectation of authority figures. Patterns establish context. Context establishes accountability. The team reviewed Reynolds' personnel file, commendations, prior minor complaints, disciplinary notes. Some dismissed for lack of evidence, others for procedural technicalities. Marcus' analysis traced each complaint subject, noting racial or demographic commonalities. The pattern was undeniable. Harris frowned. "You're making a compelling case, Mr. Avery. But systemic critique requires structural change, not just individual consequence. Are you prepared to advocate for both?" Marcus straightened. "I am." Reynolds' actions are symptomatic of gaps in training, oversight, and accountability mechanisms. Corrective action must include both personal accountability and policy reform. Otherwise, patterns will repeat. The investigators nodded, recording notes and discussing next steps in subdued tones. Marcus remained silent for a moment, reflecting on the morning's sidewalk, the crowd, and the lingering shadow of assumptions. He remembered the instinctive tension in his body, the humiliation that had been invisible to the passerby but indelibly etched into his memory. Harris continued, "We'll issue a preliminary report to the department, recommend administrative review, and determine if formal disciplinary action is warranted. Your documentation and testimony are central to this process." Marcus' jaw tightened. Ensure the report emphasizes factual patterns, procedural deviations, and corroborated evidence. Avoid editorialization. The goal is truth, not interpretation. The session concluded with logistical planning for Reynolds' response and cross-examination. Marcus was advised to remain available for further verification, though he would not need to appear unless requested. The system, slow and methodical, was beginning to engage with the consequences of the officer's misjudgment. Later, Marcus met with Elena and Jasmine in a quiet corner of a nearby cafe. The muted chatter of patrons and the smell of roasted coffee beans contrasted sharply with the intensity of the internal affairs session. "They are taking it seriously," Jasmine said, sipping her coffee. "Your documentation is airtight. Pattern recognition, corroborated evidence, social media tracking, it's all in place." Marcus nodded, fingers tapping the edge of the cup. Serious consideration does not guarantee justice. Procedure can still dilute consequence, and public perception remain fragmented. Vigilance is required. Elena frowned. "It feels like you're preparing for war rather than resolution." "I am preparing for truth," Marcus replied. "The officer's misjudgment is a microcosm of systemic bias. If we allow procedural gaps to shield misconduct, the pattern persists. Visibility is responsibility. Every step from this point forward is part of accountability." Their conversation shifted to strategy. Social media monitoring would continue, ensuring misinformation was corrected. Witnesses would remain available for clarification. Media statements were drafted to emphasize systemic concern over individual grievance, highlighting both fairness and consequence. By evening, Marcus returned to his office. He reviewed footage again, meticulously checking timestamps, angles, and behavioral indicators. Reynolds' gestures, previously unconscious assumptions, now read like data points in a comprehensive map of bias. Each frame told a story. Each witness corroborated a narrative. Each comment on social media reflected a larger societal blind spot. A notification pinged. A news outlet had published an editorial questioning systemic bias in policing, referencing the incident without naming Marcus explicitly. The narrative had shifted subtly, highlighting the structural concerns he had been advocating. Marcus leaned back, absorbing the significance. Public discourse was beginning to reflect systemic patterns rather than isolated incidents. Reynolds' behavior, once a street-level assumption, was now part of a documented framework for accountability. He thought of the officer's worldview, instinct prioritized over identity, training and tempered by bias awareness, authority insulated by procedural technicalities. Those patterns had consequences far beyond a single morning. Marcus' intervention was not just personal, it was structural. Elena observed him. "You're carrying more than one story now. You're carrying the weight of every pattern that's ever been overlooked." Marcus exhaled slowly. "That's the cost of visibility. Influence is meaningless without accountability. Justice is incomplete without systemic recognition. Every act of bias left unchecked proved procedural." But he also. 2 days later, the Internal Affairs Review reached a pivotal stage. Marcus Avery arrived at the department, briefcase in hand, ready to witness the culmination of meticulous documentation, witness statements, and corroborated evidence. The building loomed, institutional and imposing, a silent testament to bureaucracy and authority. Lieutenant Harris greeted him with a nod. "Mr. Avery, thank you for your diligence. Today, we present the full dossier to the review board. Your materials, combined with internal assessments, will determine the recommended course of action for Officer Reynolds." Marcus set down his briefcase, his fingers brushing the leather edges. "I expect the review to be thorough and impartial. Pattern recognition, procedural violations, and prior complaints must be fully considered." Inside the conference room, a panel of senior officers, internal affairs investigators, and a legal advisor assembled. Marcus observed their faces, neutral but alert, aware that institutional bias could still influence interpretation. The dossier lay open, video footage from multiple angles, timestamps, witness statements, social media threads, and prior complaints of bias enforcement. Harris spoke first. "We are reviewing an incident involving Officer Reynolds, who stopped Mr. Marcus Avery under circumstances now under scrutiny. All evidence has been compiled, analyzed, and verified." The video footage played on the projector. Marcus watched, noting the officer's rigid posture, the hand on his shoulder, the dismissive gestures. Each movement was scrutinized, cross-referenced with witnesses' accounts. The silent crowd on the street, previously unnoticed, now carried weight through documentation. A senior investigator spoke. "The conduct observed demonstrates deviation from protocol. While initial intent may be cited as procedural adherence, the pattern across prior complaints indicates selective enforcement. The evidence suggests bias influencing action. Reynolds' face appeared on screen via live video link. He had been informed of the review and was allowed representation. His posture was defensive, hands clasped, jaw tight. "I followed procedure," he said, voice clipped. "I acted based on my assessment of potential risk." Marcus observed silently, noting the officer's reliance on instinct and procedure over context and evidence. The defense mirrored the internal reasoning he had imagined. Authority insulated by assumed justification, bias veiled as precaution. Harris interjected, "We must consider not only individual actions but institutional patterns. Prior complaints, the video evidence, and corroborated statements suggest a recurring behavioral trend inconsistent with department standards." Marcus exhaled quietly, a mixture of relief and vigilance. Exposure was happening, not sensationalized in media, but methodical, factual, undeniable. Reynolds' assumptions, once unchallenged on the street, were now subject to scrutiny at the highest procedural level. The panel reviewed social media posts, highlighting the viral circulation of the encounter. Analysis included public sentiment, commentary patterns, and the initial spread of misinformation. Marcus had insisted on precision, timestamps, verified screenshots, and contextual notes. Every piece contributed to the structural narrative of bias. Jasmine Kaur, seated beside him, whispered, "Your foresight in documenting everything ensures this is undeniable. Procedure cannot dismiss this." Marcus nodded subtly. Documentation converts perception into accountability. Visibility demands responsibility. Harris addressed the room. Based on compiled evidence, internal review recommends administrative action against Officer Reynolds. Retraining, suspension, and formal reprimand are advised. Additionally, systemic review of enforcement protocols is recommended to prevent recurrence of similar bias. Reynolds' face tightened. "This is disproportionate," he said. "I acted according to training. I did my duty." "Duty," Harris replied, "does not exempt one from accountability when actions violate both procedure and civil rights. Repeated patterns indicate systemic concerns. This is the framework for corrective action." Marcus listened, his chest taut but his expression calm. Justice was procedural, structural, and in motion. Exposure was not personal vengeance. It was accountability, methodical and undeniable. The panel turned to discuss policy recommendations, bias training, review of stop-and-frisk procedures, and enhanced reporting mechanisms. Marcus realized that what had begun as a single confrontation had catalyzed structural reflection. Reynolds' actions were symptomatic of systemic gaps. Those gaps now faced scrutiny. Later, Marcus returned to his office. The city skyline glimmered, indifferent yet illuminated. Notifications from social media indicated emerging discussion, editorials, opinion pieces, and citizen commentary highlighting the importance of accountability. The narrative had shifted from a single incident to broader discourse on enforcement and bias. Elena Martinez entered, holding a folder of preliminary media coverage. "It's gaining attention, not sensationalized, but factual reporting. People are starting to recognize patterns rather than isolated acts." Marcus glanced at the folder. "Good. The focus must remain systemic, not personal. Accountability without context risks misunderstanding." They discussed next steps, formal statements, continued monitoring of public sentiment, and policy recommendations to the department. Marcus emphasized evidence-driven communication, precise framing, and visibility without hyperbole. Each move reinforced structural accountability rather than personal narrative. That evening, Marcus reflected on the path from the street to the boardroom. The officer's assumptions, once enforced with a hand on his shoulder and a dismissive glare, had been transformed into data points, corroborated by witnesses, time-stamped in videos, and contextualized with prior complaints. Procedural oversight, combined with meticulous documentation, had converted ephemeral bias into actionable consequence. He thought of the officer's worldview, one shaped by instinct, inherited assumptions, and institutional reinforcement. Now, those assumptions were exposed to scrutiny, judgment, and correction. Authority unexamined had consequences. Authority examined demanded accountability. Marcus exhaled, feeling a slight release of tension. The system was slow, deliberate, and imperfect, yet the machinery of exposure was functioning. Reynolds' actions, the assumptions behind them, and the structural gaps that enabled them were now visible. Elena watched him quietly. "Do you feel any relief?" Marcus shook his head. "Not relief. Vigilance. Justice is not a feeling. It's a process. And this process is ongoing." He returned to his window, watching traffic flow and city light shimmer. Exposure had occurred. Accountability had begun. Yet the emotional toll, the labor of visibility, and the responsibility of influence remained. Each step forward demanded attention, persistence, and precision. The street outside, where once a hand on his shoulder had defined perception, now existed as part of a documented, undeniable truth. Reynolds' assumptions were unmasked, systemic gaps illuminated, and accountability initiated. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the culmination of strategic preparation, evidence gathering, and procedural insistence. Visibility had become responsibility, and responsibility had yielded exposure.